Hey, on today's episode, we are talking about practice valuations, the art of practice valuations. I am Dave Kittle, owner of Concierge Pain Relief Home Physical Therapy in the New York City area and the CEO of the Fieldmaker Group. We're currently speaking with practice owners about partnering or acquiring some or all of their practice in the New York and New Jersey area. And today we have Jason Horowitz on the show. He is the founder and managing partner of HDS Advisory. You can check them out online at hdsadvisory.com. He's a management consultant, and he helps practice owners on the buy side and the sell side. So if you're looking to exit and sell in the next year or two, he might be able to help. And as well as if you're not looking to sell and you're looking to buy and lay out growth and strategic plans into the future, he could also help. So I think Jason will be perfectly positioned to talk about practice valuations. We're going to talk about multiples and potential ranges. We're going to get into all that, how the buy side and the sell side can underwrite deals, go through these exercises of how do we figure out the value and the actual asking price or the worth of a practice. Before we get into that, Jason, welcome on.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, and carving time out for myself is very special for me. So
you got it. So give the audience a little bit of a background if they don't know you, a little bit of yourself, the firm, and the practices that you help.
Sure, absolutely. So Jason Horowitz, founder and managing partner of HDS Advisory. My background, I've been it's about 2.5 decades worth of experience in the healthcare services industry. I cut my teeth over in Wall Street as a traditional investment banker, providing services for healthcare providers, health systems, the senior care providers, insurance companies, buy side, sell side, raising money. Your typical 90-hour-a-week investment banker. I decided to move over to more of the corporate side back in 2014, where I was an executive at one of the largest health systems here in New York, helping build their ambulatory practices and strategies and help grow that business from about $2 to $8 billion. And then post-COVID, decided to take a couple of steps and try to do these things on my own. I think that there is definitely a lack and a gap of experience for strong advisors and consultants in the small to medium-sized practice arena. And I thought that I could take my specialties to, kind of to the public. So HDS Advisory was formed. I have a pretty good staff and a network that I built to help both buy side and sell side. I spend about 50% of the time doing sell side advisory work and 50% of the time doing buy side. Buy side is also split between large practices and private equity. So I think I have a pretty good grasp of what the market looks like. And over the past 25 years, everything winds up being cyclical anyway. So if we haven't seen it, in the next 5 years, we certainly saw it the past 5 years. So looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And I know that we are mainly talking about this title of practice valuations. Practice valuations are more art than science. And we're going to get into that. In the pre-interview, I was asking you, so you're in Long Island, I believe, right? Not too far away from you.
I am, yep.
Yep. So we're in the same geographical area. Obviously, things like valuation, it changes based off of payer mix and location and scale, obviously, and a whole host of other factors, referral partners, and so many other factors that we can get into. But in the pre-interview, I was asking you about, multiple ranges. What are you seeing out there for, a million or two size, practice? Are they in the 3 or 4 range of 3 or 4x EBITDA for valuations? We'll get into that a little bit. There was something before we get into more of like the art than science. You were mentioning in the pre-interview about what maybe in the past year or two or a couple of years of a lot of these practices being valued at maybe 1 to 1.2 times revenue. And then either some of the smaller ones or maybe those practices now are a little bit closer to 0.7 to 0.9x of revenue. When you look at some of those, and you kind of mentioned in the pre-interview, you also have to kind of check, like, does this make sense from an EBITDA standpoint? I know some of these, there's a little bit of an overlap with some of these numbers. What are some of the initial jumping off points with these valuations that you discuss with your clients on the buy side and the sell side?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great starting point. So, the first is I was formerly trained as a chemical engineer, so I have this kind of process universe going on in my world. And if you can't measure where you are today, you're not going to be able to figure out where you want to be either tomorrow and how to get there, right? So, valuation is that perfect jumping point. And when you're dealing, especially with smaller and mid-sized firms, uh, we finance folk like to use very fancy words like EBITDA, operating margin, and using all these particular terms. And at the end of the day, it winds up being more confusing to folks. So we were talking about in the pregame, a better metric, or how I like to use better metrics, which is sales. Right. I have a patient coming in, he or she is going to be either, commercial pay or self-pay or, government pay, but I'm going to get a certain amount of cash that's going to be coming in the door. And back and having those conversations, it usually wound up being medium-sized practices and kind of the million to, $5 million range. A very simple rule of thumb, right? 0.9 to 1.1 times, dollars in the door, really, regardless of where those dollars are coming from. And if you did an analysis probably over the past 15 to 20 years, and you converted that back to an EBITDA margin or an operating margin, it would be the normal conversion of 4 to 6 times, maybe 6.5 times, EBITDA. But as the market shifted a little bit, and we're seeing this really a lot post-COVID, margins have been squeezed so much, operating margins have been squeezed so much that revenue number, which is dollars within the door, has come down from a valuation perspective. And I think, now we're seeing a 0.7 to 0.9, which is almost, when you look at it historically, a distress level for almost any provider, health system, physician group, ASC. If you can't make 100 cents on the dollar coming in from a value perspective, then traditionally you're doing something wrong and there should be low-hanging fruit. But that seems to be the norm today. And that's the conversation that I've been having with a lot of folks, which is, reality is, we all know it's very difficult to get human capital in the door, to get reimbursed correctly. Inventories and raw materials are increasing, and your margins are being squeezed. So that's relating a lot to, folks in trying to value these practices. Even the large people that you can get some synergies, there's a question whether I'm going to pay for that or not, right? But again, the reality is I need to be able to have a return on my investment. And if I'm not making the amount of money that I thought I would be, then I'm probably going to have a different valuation coming in. They're tough, very tough conversations today, but you need to, I think, build that relationship and set those expectations very early on, or else it's going to be a very difficult process on the sell side. On the buy side, if you have capital, it's buyer's market, 100%. You can have the cream of the crop. You can, play the distress game, and folks are having a lot of fun if they have some dry powder on their balance sheet.
Got it. You mentioned a squeeze on operating margins. Is that, obviously, reimbursement is pretty much plateaued. It's not going to necessarily increase dramatically anytime soon. And there's an increase in, inflation now is better than last year, but there's still every year these practices have to pay a little bit higher rent, a little bit higher payroll. Team members are asking for raises and all that. So are those some of the major forces affecting these operating margins?
Yeah, you talk about the it's just the margin gap, right? Reimbursement, whether it's steady or staying the same, or maybe you're getting the 2 to 3%, it never was keeping up with that inflation, right? So, and then on the operating side, human capital the cost for finding and retaining human capital, from people to manage the front desk, to do billing and cycling, to actually having clinicians, it is extraordinary post-COVID, especially in our area, Dave. We just can't find good people and afford good people to stay within practices. So you have the combined salary increases, benefit increases, rents, electricity, all of that. Even if it's subsided from an inflation perspective, reimbursement hasn't kept up in the past 2 decades, let alone in the past 5 years. And so where I think you're seeing the biggest squeeze right now is folks were trying to make that up in volume. And in order to increase volume, you either have to increase referral networks, or you have to do advertising, or you have to bring something different to the table to try and increase that patient base. And there's not enough extra dollars to do that, right? I can't hire someone just to go out and do community outreach. Even advertising on your podcast, or and on in the newspapers or television, or however folks are using media right now, it's expensive. It's difficult. So you wind up into this death spiral. And for the smaller practices, it's been quite a challenge.
Right. And now you layer on this calendar year, 2023, the incremental increase in interest rates, because one thing that we're discussing in the pre-interview is that valuations are being compressed. You mentioned because financing is rough or challenging. And I asked you in the pre-interview, are you seeing financing, or is your perception of financing being tough or challenging because of this climate interest rates?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at first blush, that's what people are saying. Oh, it's higher interest rates, higher cost of capital. Yeah, I have to have higher rates of return in order to, make these dollars work for me. And frankly, while that is a component, the missing component is, especially on the buy side scenario, where folks are financing transactions through existing lines, and whether those existing lines were fixed or floating on the rate, there are covenants associated with it. So the existing buyer's practice has operating margins that they have to achieve, has to have cash on hand that they have to achieve, debt ratios that they have to meet on a quarterly basis. And if their operations have been squeezed, their lines get shut down regardless of whether it was available 6 months ago. So when I talk about, having a challenging financing environment, it's just not only the ability to, get the return on investment because of higher interest rates, but it's also the access to that capital, whether you had it or not. And then you have a real question to yourself: if I don't have access to a loan, which I had before, because it was shut down because of some covenant issues, my next phase, if I really want an acquisition to occur, is getting cash. And cash can either be from cash on the balance sheet, or going from partners, or raising equity, right? And the raising equity component, that's also a little bit tricky. Not only is it the highest cost of capital that anyone's going to see, if there's not excess funds in your partners and your LPs and or your other physician partners to go and give you money to buy a practice, it's just not going to be there. They have mortgages to pay. Their kids are going to college, and they own their own operations. Have to be working well. So,
got it. Now, for practice valuations, as you're saying, are more art than science. Do you typically kind of start with some of the math and the science of like you said, the back of the napkin type math, like $1 million practice, and at any given time, whether this year, 3-4 years ago, next year, $1 million practice, let's just say you're saying maybe 0.7 to 0.9, which would be a valuation of 700,000 to 900,000, or maybe as high as 1 to 1.2x of revenue, which would be $1 million or 1.2 million. So kind of like there's like a window of from $700,000 to 1.2 million, right? So is that kind of like a starting point for a lot of practice owners to think about? And then it's the art of like all those other factors of what will slide that practice closer to maybe 700,000, depending on the environment, depending on financing, depending on all these other factors. But $1 million practice in a lot of geographies, a lot of metros, maybe that window of 700,000 to 1.2 million. And then there's the factors of everything else that we mentioned that slides them up and down that scale. Is that one way to look at it, or is that not a good way to look at it?
Yeah, no, that's definitely one way to look at it. And it really depends on your partner, right? Your client. You'll have some folks that are very sophisticated, and where we will start is having a conversation on operating margins and EBITDA margins, right? We'll talk about all that great stuff that advisors, typically spend a lot of get paid for from a valuation standpoint, which is, this is your tax return. These are going to be your particular add backs, one-time expenses. This would be the range of kind of the operating margins. And that is still science, right? There are accepted methodologies for valuation, both from a legal perspective and from, what I would just say, an advisor perspective that we all go through. And I think we know it, right? M&A, present transactions, discounted cash flows, public transactions, replacement costs. That tends to be the science part. Where I then like to take part is the art, right? The 25, 30 years of experience, the understanding that it takes a buyer and a seller in order to make a transaction. And there needs to be some sort of meeting of the minds all along the transaction process. And so I could tell you with very sure certainty what your EBITDA is by the dollar based on the methodology of accepted, practices. And then I could tell you, and you probably will not get that number. And here's the reason why. Because as a professional, I know that a one-time personal charge that you put through your private practice will not exist going forward from the sell side perspective. And from the buy side perspective, yes, that won't exist, but I'm going to have 2 or 3 other charges that I'm going to put on your expense portion that may or may not work, to your advantage, right? So you're going to have a mismatch of the minds. And so how do we bridge that gap? And so then we start using the art, right? Are you the largest player or the strongest player from a referrals perspective within your community? What does your reimbursement look like? How long have you been practicing? Are there additional practitioners within, your office? Have you put together a very, smart patient experience plan and an advertising plan? All those things could, increase value where it can decrease value. Do you have debt? Do you have big churn in your employee base? Is your demographics a lot of self-pay, but low income? Those things are kind of detrimental. So you put the pluses and the minuses. We kind of mix it up in this little black box, and we say, okay, Dave, at the end of the day, what do you want to have in your pocket, right? Because that's what we're talking about. If you want to sell and you're not looking to be a partner with somebody, but you're really looking to, take dollars off the table, what's going to make you and your wife and your family happy? And that number is a net number. It's not a gross number, right? If I pay you $1 million today, I still got capital gains that I have to pay. Maybe there's some deferred escrow payments that you got to pay your advisory fees. So what's going to be the number in your pocket? And then the art is, or how do I get you that number? And maybe, just maybe, there are other attributes to the transaction that can get you there. Do you want to stay on board for 3 years and be a practitioner? What's your employment agreement going to look like? Are you the owner of the building? What does your rent look like? Right? Are you taking advantage of being the owner of this particular site, or are you just leasing to a third party? Do you have some sort of ancillary, products or devices that you're selling, or maybe you have your own podcast and your own website that has some sort of value in an email list. Maybe we can monetize that in a certain way. But you got to take all these components together, have that conversation with your client, and then come up with a number, and then be realistic about going out to market and seeing if that number is going to be,
Got it. So when you're on the sell side, do you help your clients with that behind the scenes of like, what's the net number you want, you and your wife, your spouse, your partner, whatever it might be? What's that net number that you are looking to then, have in retirement, whatever they're going to then do with that money? But that number that's an approach that you use from the sell side. And then also when you're on the other side of the table, do you also ask that type of a question from the buy side? Like, kind of like, let's get down to it. Like, there's all these other things that we've gone through, but like, is there a number that you really are looking for after legal fees or advisory fees and whatever it might be to get through this process, the capital gains, all of that, taxes, et cetera? Is that something that you've also asked from the buy side, or is that more from the sell side when you're like one-on-one with your client?
Yeah, it's both, Dave. Frankly, I live under a mantra where I don't want to trade time for money. Right. That's not me. I'm not an attorney. Right. And even in my management and consulting business, I don't charge by the hour when I'm doing certain projects. Right. This is all value added projects, and we'll work together as partners. So the last thing that I want to do is extend a transaction or a transaction process. For no reason. So on the buy side, there are a couple of ways that we go about it. One, what are you really looking for kind of on a return of investment? People have that idea. Like for every practice that you're going to bring in, what are the expectations? What are the upsides? How much do you think this is going to bring in from a top line perspective? And where do you actually think synergies are going to be from a margin so that you can get that return? How much capital do you have to play with, and how much time do you have to be able to grow that? Once you establish that with your buyer, then when you're having the conversation with the seller, it is very easy to say, I'm being transparent. Here's where the transaction lays today. This is where the obstacles are going to be from a financial perspective. Let's see if we're going to be able to bridge it. Now, my advisory work is probably very different than other brokers or advisors out there. I want to have the most educated people at the table and be completely transparent, because only then can we get to a conclusion quickly and acceptable to both parties. I'm not one of these guys that are going to come in and say, oh, I'm going to lowball you here and then see if I can get away with this. And to me, that, you're not doing anybody any favors. Yeah, everyone's going to have a bid and an ask, and then we'll go around a couple of negotiations. But let's get to the ballpark, right? If I'm at I'm at 6 times EBITDA, if my seller wants 6 times EBITDA and my buyer's at like 2.5, what are we talking about, right? So let's just lay that out on the table. I love you. It's been a great, initial conversation, great meal, whatever it is. Good luck on your process.
Got it. I had another podcast guest recently. I can't recall who said it. It might have been John Barnes. I think it was John Barnes, another advisor based on the West Coast. And he was down south. So he had said on the show, great practices are not sold, they're bought. What are your thoughts around practice owners that get to a point of maybe it's COVID took the wind out of their sail. They're frustrated. There's this, you mentioned the compression of operating margins and all these other inflationary components, higher interest rates, all this other stuff going on, salaries, rent, everything else is increasing, reimbursement staying the same. So there's a challenge. A lot of these practices are getting squeezed. And a lot of those practice owners, they get frustrated. Maybe they get fatigued. They're just done with it. And they're at the point where then they're going to try to exit at some point. What's the difference between that type of a practice or practice owner versus a practice owner who, regardless of age, maybe they have better margins, they have some moat or some, savvy component that with referral partners, whatever it might be, better online marketing that you kind of mentioned, where those practice owners maybe get approached by, the regional or corporate buyers, and those buyers are looking to get a foothold in that geographical region or something. Can you speak to the difference between maybe those practice owners that have to sell a practice, or they want to get out, versus the practice owners that have maybe a little more of an appealing practice where buyers will be a little more competitive in their offers, and those practices are going to then be quote unquote bought as opposed to being sold?
Yeah, I actually love that quote. I may have to steal that one. So great practices, definitely get bought. And you see it, you know it right when you're walking in. If as a person who's pitching a deal on the sell side, you know it right away whether this is a seller or just someone looking for entrepreneurial, growth story, taking it to that next level. And there are kind of 3 or 4 questions that I ask right away, right? So, why are you going to sell, right? And usually, or why are we talking, right? Why are we having this conversation? If it's, I'm tired is one of the big things that you've mentioned, right? I'm tired of owning a practice. And that ownership comes with the HR component, the reimbursement component, all these things are running. I just want to be either I want to be a clinician or I just want to be out. That's on kind of the left side of the table, and they are sellers, right? They're done. They're looking for the highest price in the minimum amount of time, and whether they're going to be employees or not, that's kind of secondary in nature. To me, that's broker business, maybe a little bit advisory if we can spruce it up to get a higher valuation. I tend not to deal with those people, but that's a personal choice. There are 1,000 of me's running around trying to gain business on the sell side. And, we'll all charge kind of whatever this is, from a practice perspective. And people are going to be able to do a good job. But if you're just looking to get out, I'll probably have you talk to like 4 or 5 other different people, because that just doesn't excite me. But it's the other folks that, regardless of what was going on with margins and compressions, they're excited. They're talking about growth strategies. They're talking about patient experience. They're talking about, different types of healthcare delivery services and integrations. And what possibly could I do if I had this, right? Where am I today? And what could I do if I had Y? And whether that's capital, whether that's, money capital or human capital, whether that's different services, just a bigger referral network, always thinking those are the type of people, they're bought. And 100% you're going to get corporate buyers and larger buyers in there. Why? Because you have leadership that has a mentality of still being an owner and not an employee, somebody of growth, understanding the markets or wanting to understand the markets and still wanting to be in the game for a longer period of time.
Got it. And in regards to any other components of valuations, art more than the science, or being in the art component, what other things maybe we haven't covered or haven't discussed that would be contributory to this conversation, that kind of adds into the nuance? Sometimes this being a nuanced situation because every practice is different, and then there's all those components, and then it's like, the sell side, the advisor coming up with an asking price, or you're asking the buyers just for, blind bids, and, your client is looking for the best opportunity. What are some other things that maybe either we just overlooked or we haven't covered yet that kind of contribute to this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, then that's a good way to kind of end this. I like to look at transactions in a holistic point of view, and getting back to that, when you're on the sell side, getting back to that question to the owner of, what are we talking about and what are you looking for, right? And that all in number. So the transactions have a lot of different components to it. There's the actual selling of the practice, right? You have that upfront consideration, but a nuance there could be, do you need all those dollars up front, or can there be some sort of earnouts or performance-based metrics going forward? On top of that, are you going to be an employee, or are you going to still be participating in the business or not? There's a revenue stream there that can certainly be negotiated that makes this more attractive or less attractive, both from a income perspective and then from a bonus perspective. And then there are other components to the transaction that adds value to your nest egg. We talk about real estate and landlords. A lot of practices own the real estate. It is a great tax shelter and income preservation that makes transactions go a lot further when folks can't meet the asking price, right? If I know that I'm going to get $300,000 worth of rent on an annual basis over the next 5 years at triple net, and I'm paying very limited income tax on that because of the way that I structured it, that is very attractive to an owner. So you should not necessarily say, oh, where they're going to be $500,000 light on my upfront, value, right? That may be true, but you're going to be sitting down in Miami and you're going to be collecting a check off of that. So I think of all of these components that have to go in with the deal. And sometimes it just, it's not in forefront. I'm a practice owner. I want to sell my practice. How much money am I getting? How much capital gains am I taking? And when am I putting in kind of my account afterwards? And yes, it's one way to look at it, but again, there are other components, and we need to be able to bring those to the table.
Got it. So final question. Let's say you're on the sell side, you have a client. You earlier mentioned, or we covered the question of like, what number do you want? Like after all expenses, legal fees, advisory, whatever, taxes, capital gains, whatever, like what type of number? Either that number, or you talk to your client about like what they think they want or need for selling and getting out of their practice. Mm-hmm. Let's say you have a new client and their expectations are wildly misaligned with economic reality or what you're seeing. Can you typically kind of counsel and coach and educate a lot of these potential sellers over some amount of time where you're maybe communicating about possibly working together? Or are some practice owners just like not able to be realigned to the valuation of their potential practice? What have you seen historically?
Like with every question, it depends. And mostly it depends on the specialty. And folks may be chuckling out there saying, you may have some alpha male/female types in certain specialties that just say, no, I've been to medical school and surgical school and did my residency for 8 years. And I have an MBA and I know I'm worth this. And yeah, those guys and gals are probably not going to be convinced with someone like myself. But I hope that with kind of the personality and just and the experience and relationships I've built over the years, there's some credibility in the fact that I have all the time in the world, since I don't trade it for value, right? I have all the time in the world to help counsel, folks and get people there. And so this, to me, it's about building relationships, having, long-term commitments with folks. I'm not in constant sale mode. If I am sitting and having a dinner with you on the initial pitch, I expect to have at least, 2, 3, 4 more, conversations before we even start talking about value and what it's going to take. Because again, it's understanding the motives and what that practice is really going through. Dave, I'll give you a perfect example, right? So we spoke about sellers and buyers, and knowing that when you walk into a scenario, that if someone's a seller, I'm tired, right? So I'm dealing with a practice. We'll go no names in Mid-Atlantic, orthopedic surgeon. Has got 3 junior associates. Has been practicing about 25 years. Owns a small ambulatory surgery center also, and he's like, I'm exhausted. I have to get out. None of my junior associates are going to be able to pay what I think I'm worth. I got 2 kids going into college because they were twins. You gotta, we just gotta sell. And what I told Dr. Y was, how about this? How about you take your family out on a vacation, 2-week vacation, just tune out, man. Just don't do anything. Your junior associate's doing great. You don't need to be here. You just got to refresh. Your kids are going away to school in September. Don't worry about it. Comes back, and the next phone call out of his mouth is like, yeah, do you think that we could go raise a little bit of capital? Because I want to buy another ASC. It's just a matter of reframing and trying to figure out what's really going on in the person's head. The last 3 years have been extremely difficult for folks. And the economic environment over the past year plus through inflation and everything else, and it's also been difficult. So I try not to take everything at face value. I really try to listen and have those follow-up conversations, which is just a roundabout way of saying there are some people that can be saved. There are some people that can't be saved. It probably takes me a little bit longer to figure out which is which, but that's on me and not on them.
Got it. Really perfect way to wrap up. What's a good place, Jason, for the audience to reach out to you if they want to potentially communicate with you about either on the sell side, potentially exiting their practice, or on the buy side if they're looking to grow and expand? Email address, LinkedIn, website. What's a good place for the audience to connect with you further?
Absolutely. www.hdsadvisory.com. There's a link there that if you want to put in your information, book a 15-minute free consultation for me, best way to do it. I'm also on LinkedIn, Jason Horowitz / something or another. My mug is on it, but HDS Advisory is also on LinkedIn, and looking forward to having people reach out and just hearing what's going on. Dave, I really appreciate the time this morning. I know that we've been trying to. Took a little bit longer to connect, but I'm glad that we got this, under our belt.
All good. We're both busy. Appreciate it. And so anyone in the audience, if you find this helpful and valuable, go ahead and subscribe to the Dave Kittle Show on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. We'll catch you next time here on the show. And Jason, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Dave Kittle. Are you a healthcare business owner or physical therapy practice owner who is looking to figure out your succession plan or exit strategy? We might be able to help. And in fact, we may be interested in acquiring your practice. If you're interested, you can reach out to me. Shoot me an email at dave@conciergepainrelief.com. That's DAVE at CONCIERGE painrelief.com. Or you can call me at any time, 646-781-8884.